Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name is Sean Slatter, and for 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. On this episode, I'm so excited to have a longtime friend of mine, the Honorable Alex A. Beeler, who has served in a number of appointee positions in the Pentagon and in the Congress. And most recently, Alex was appointed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Army Installations, Energy and Environment, and really has led the Army's strategy around the installation of the future. His history and skill set is very unique, and I think you'll enjoy this. He is a subject matter expert on military installations. He has a passion for resiliency and the environment, and he is an incredible policy strategist. And we're so excited to have him back on our team. He left for this appointee role for several years and is now back as part of the LSI team. And one of the other things that I think is interesting about Alex is that in 2019, Alex was awarded the Army Medal for Superior Public Service, which is just remarkable. So I hope you enjoy this conversation that I've had with Alex and some of the things that are so relevant today, especially IIJA. Alex, thanks so much for being with me this morning on this episode. I've been really excited to hold this discussion with you. You and I have known each other for a lot of years, and I really admire all of the work that you have done for the Department of Defense, for the commercial sector, and especially for us over the years. Maybe just start by talking about your background and your history. And I think you've got an interesting story as to how you entered federal service. And I mean, why don't you start there and talk about a bit of your career?
Well, thank you, Sean and Lauren. This is a great opportunity for me, and I have to say that I've thoroughly enjoyed my relationship both professionally and personally with LSI, with you, with Josh, and all the other colleagues with whom I've had the opportunity to work. You have a great organization. You do interesting things. You obviously are very successful financially, but I guess more importantly, you provide great value added both to the clients and the interpersonal relationships. So thank you for such an opportunity. My background quickly, I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to college in New Jersey at Princeton. The most relevant thing there for this conversation is the one reason why I was interested in Princeton is that it had within the undergraduate academic program a separate school of public and international affairs in which you actually applied for your sophomore year and you got accepted or rejected. It was a school within a school, and it was interdisciplinary. It had, for independent work, so to speak, there were task force and policy conferences and on topics of current interest in that time. One of them was the energy crisis and United States trying to become energy independent. That seemed to be a recurring theme over the past 50 years.
Right.
And it was euphemistically said it was the school on how to become a better bureaucrat. So I obviously took it to heart, and I hopefully it made me a better bureaucrat in my professional time, in which I went on to law school at University of Virginia, and then upon graduation, had spent my entire professional career here in the Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway. That's now coming up on 44 years, and almost 50% of the time has been as a federal government employee in various agencies, including the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, on which I served at counsel, the Department of Justice, on which I was a senior trial attorney as a federal civil environmental prosecutor. I was also at US EPA and their headquarters as a attorney advisor to one of the most senior legal person at the time. And then, of course, my 2 times at the Department of Defense. First 5 years with the Office of Secretary of Defense in what was then called Installations and Environment, and more recently, 2 years in the Army Secretariat as Assistant Secretary for Installations, Energy, and Environment. And the theme here is several themes. Number one, always interested in government affairs, public service, international affairs. And that drove me in my decision to go to law school and come to Washington, D.C. as the best educational background to pursue those interests. And then add on to that my experience at Princeton. I had hope, or had the hope, to get off on the right foot, so to speak. And so I started at a law firm, but my desire was to get into public service. And I had a great experience on the Senate Judiciary Committee, working as part of the lawyer committee staff for Senator Bob Dole. And what a great American in so many ways. Then, and that was right in 1980, 81, that was a good experience because on top of everything else, the Senate changed party control. So I got the experience of working when Senator Dole and his team was in the minority, and then when they were in the majority. And to bring it relevant to today's news, when the Republicans were in minority, the chair of the Judiciary Committee was Senator Ted Kennedy, and his chief of staff was Stephen Breyer. So there you have it. And that shows how long I've been around Washington, when he's gone on, had an illustrious career as one of the associate justices, is now announcing his retirement. Anyway, that led me to want to serve in the Reagan administration, which led me to EPA, where I thought it would be a very active, and at that point it was relatively new, federal agency in environmental area. And I'd always generally been interested in environment, nature, energy, sort of the world around us, basically, and how that can be positively affected by smart government policy. And so that was my launching. And I have more or less since that time been engaged in some sort, whether public or private, jobs in environment, law, and policy. Got expanded to energy as that became more important in more recent times. And then finally, with my time in the Department of Defense, with issues related to infrastructure, tying in with the environment and energy. So that's a lot of my background, so I'll stop here.
That is fantastic. And I love spending time with you because you've got so much history and you've seen so much that has happened over multiple administrations, and you've been very successful over your career working inside of different parties and working partisan issues even. And I really admire all of your work, and it is fun to spend time with you and talk about this history. Let me jump ahead. I want to come back to some of the things that you had mentioned in your career and the history of your body of work, but you most recently served as the Army's director of installations, and it was an interesting time during your service within the Army because during that time, COVID was, we were dealing with the effects of COVID. You sent, or DOD sent 1 million people home who were working in installations. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I mean, talk about your time in the Army and dealing with those kinds of logistic issues.
Well, certainly. So my position in the Army was in the Army Secretariat in the Pentagon, and it was one of 4 assistant secretaries who advises the Secretary of the Army and the Undersecretary for policy in the particular portfolio ascribed. And mine was installations, energy, and the environment. As far as COVID goes, I was at my desk every work day.
I know you were.
And so in that sense, it did not affect my daily activity, although clearly it reduced the number of travel, conferences where I would likely have been a speaker or panelist. So it certainly had that effect. But keep in mind that even in the Pentagon, every uniformed person, soldier, sailor, airman assigned to the Pentagon was at his or her desk every day. So, and that represents in the Pentagon, it's probably about 25% of the people are uniform. Absolutely, there were adjustments that had to be made, just as in any large organization. But I think that by and large, there were a few hiccups, but I think they were easily overcome so that performance continued in the manner that was to be expected. So I don't think COVID situation provided a huge difference from the standpoint of what my role plus my office's role was, and able to implement what we thought was important. 2-year window, and the COVID hammer came down about the 14th month of my time there. So the last 10 months were otherwise restricted. Having said that, we were able to get hopefully some long-term significant steps taken, such as the Army installation strategy that was signed off by the senior leadership of the Army, which means the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of a 4-star of the Army, the top uniform, and then we also got the endorsement of all the 4-star generals who had a force command of some sort. This was the first time any service had ever had an installation strategy that was signed off by its service leaderships. And I think that was all done during the time of COVID. So, thank heavens for modern telecommunications where we could overcome the challenges of not being able to meet as frequently in person. The biggest thing, and this is why I feel the installation strategy is so important to get on the books. Services, the Army is no different than the Navy and the Air Force in this regard. And defense leaders generally tend to want to focus on the latest and greatest that could be used to successfully defend our country from competitors who might do us harm. And that often means the latest and greatest in modern weaponry. And of course, that certainly is important. But forgotten has been all too often the installations themselves and the requirement to make them as just as modern in the 21st century sense, or as our senior Army chief, McConville, would say, we need an Army in the internet age rather than the industrial age. And that applies to installations as well. Not only that, I had one of my lines that I was trying to succinctly convey the significance and the role change of installations. And I would say, and did say, and it seemed to be well accepted, that the fence line has become the front line. And what I meant by that was the tradition of the installation being within the fence line, being isolated, not only from surrounding communities, but from any kind of harm that might prevail, is no longer the case. You have certainly, number one, the surrounding communities, particularly with the larger installations, are very much part of it. It's where so many people who work at the installation, whether they're in the Army's case, soldiers, their families, civilians, contractors, support, live and exist. So they're an integral part. And the harm that can come now is whether it's cybersecurity attacks or tampering with social media, or some of these very small but far-flung weaponry, so that the installations they've become more exposed to what we describe as multi-domain operations and warfare. And that just means the multi-domain or land, sea, air, space, and cyber. And then in turn, the installations from a positive or proactive standpoint have become more important as power projection platforms, which means that if you need to move troops 24-hour time to a far-flung place in the world, it's absolutely essential that that installation from which the troops would be sent is ready to go 24/7, has access to everything it needs to project successfully that power.
I was so excited when you were nominated by the president to fill this role. There's really no one that better understands defense installations and all of the complexity of these installations better than you, Alex. And we talked a lot about this following your nomination and then confirmation. And I mean, for you to go in and lead this transformation of installations was it was incredible, and especially at this time. You had mentioned that your vision and strategy about modernizing installations, just like we modernize weapon systems. LSI over the last 50 years has really been known for our work with defense contractors, government, federal contractors that are providing commodities. But that installation is where it all happens. And many of those installations, as you know, have not been updated since, I mean, many of them are World War II or earlier era facilities and inefficient and really did not accommodate the warfighter of today. And for you to lead this, it was just amazing. I mean, maybe talk for a minute about your idea of this, the installation of the future, which you were the architect of this. Talk about overall, I know it's complex, but overall, what do you envision these installations look like? And especially now post-COVID, what do they look like? We sent 1 million people home during COVID, and some of them have now come back, but a lot of them haven't. What does the installation look like moving into post-COVID eras?
Well, first, thank you for your compliments. I really appreciate that. And on the installation of the future, are so many people who have given this a lot of thought long before I arrived on the scene. So I'm just, in that regard, taking advantage, if you will. I'm riding the wave, and at least while I was there. I guess we should separate the Pentagon, which of course is an installation. Its future may look different than the other more normal military installations. Little known fact is that each of the services pays the equivalent of rent to the Office of Secretary of Defense, who's really is the manager, if you will, of the Pentagon, for their respective space that they use. And it is likely that none of the services will ever need their respective spaces again in the Pentagon. So, that'll be an interesting long-term dynamic as to how that space is best used. For the normal installations, I think it's a combination of a variety of things, not only COVID generated, but just the sense that with the advance of telecommunication, of virtual learning in every which way, what that means is, to me, is that the capability and the access to individual, I'll say, accoutrements to execute soldier by soldier becomes more important and a key component in the success and efficiency of function of installations. And by that, I mean what soldiers, whether they're in the field or in offices or virtually in offices and virtually in the field, can do to implement their job. Even just to take an example, in the field, the way the modern soldier, say Army soldier, is equipped is just so different than the way that same soldier was equipped just 20 years ago. And whether it's the emphasis that to the extent there's fighting, it's done at night. That means you need all these night vision related things. You need battery power packs. The idea is that the soldier on the move has more that he or she individually is potentially capable of doing, but in order to execute, they need power. And that is then the name of the game, is how to give them power that doesn't encumber them. That means, making the battery packs as light as possible, making a lot of other equipment as light as possible, as flexible as possible. So first you have the concept of the soldier within the battalion, how that will evolve, change, and function. Then you have, I'll call it the office work, and how that will change and develop. In either case, the potential is for the individual to be more independent in his or her work. Finally, and this was brought forward in the Army installation strategy, no installation stands alone. They're not islands anymore. They are, as the term was used, constellation of installations. And by that, we mean that installations will more and more develop complementary specialties that then can be successfully used by other installations. And whether that means long-range testing or that would take advantage of some great distances in between, or just a variety of expertise. But what that does mean is that installations will ideally communicate more and more among themselves than they currently do. And they therefore will have to have all of the technical capabilities, plus the resilience, what I call 24/7 access to energy and water, electricity, cyber, to make all that happen. So in order for all of that to be effective, you have to do much more long-range planning on a holistic basis. The installation strategy sets out very broad parameters through 2035 and beyond. You then, of course, in implementing, you have to put the money where the focus is, and that's always a challenge. Currently, installations, and this has been true for decades, and you alluded to this earlier, Sean, have only been funded at about 60 to 65% of where they should be funded to maintain the current level of quality and to at least do some capital improvements along the way. So there's a lot at stake, but the best way of tackling all this is to start with long-range planning that's bought in across the service enterprise and work at it over a long-range planning by the Army, in this case, the Army leadership. Too much of the time, what went on at the installation level could have been subject to perhaps the whims of whomever was charged at that installation at a particular time. And that often ended up into being, at best, not helpful moving along, and in some cases, counterproductive. So hopefully, new outlook, long-term, broad, and consistency in approach and funding to implement.
You and I have been to a lot of defense installations in our career. I've been to the majority of the major DoD installations. And over the years, we've joked about, could this ever happen today? Could we ever create a large base like a Fort Carson or a Tinker Air Force Base, or, because of many of these installations have been owned by the Department of Defense for over 100 years. And even some of the depots that we think of today that are doing amazing, very modern production work, they were established either during World War II or prior to World War II. So, but during the time you were in this position, I think you did start a new base, the Army's Futures Command in Austin, Texas. Was that put together while you were in the Pentagon?
So that actually was formed in 2018, and they had been planning it, I think, for a little bit before that.
They had.
And that was just before I arrived in the Pentagon, January of 2019.
Okay. So, I mean, there are some new installations that are being developed and created, and they do look very different from these World War II era or pre-World War II era installations. And a lot of your ideas and strategy have been implemented in some of these new installations.
Well, the Army, you're very kind to say that, but the Army Futures Command is a command, and they, in picking the location, they deliberately selected Austin with the relationship in mind with the University of Texas, where at least the headquarters of the Army Futures Command is located. The idea being, in part, University of Texas, very well known, reputation for research and development. Also, frankly, the potential there for internships and for interest in the Army and engaging in the Army. The other thing to note is that the Army's Futures Command oversees all of the Army's research and development labs. And so it's a command, not a specific installation. And I guess by analogy, although I don't know the details nearly as well, you have the Space Command that is being set up. It's the same sort of idea of drawing upon different components to form under one organizational structure. In the case of the Army Futures Command, pretty much every command is led by a four-star general. And so when they were creating the Army's Futures Command, they had to make sure that there was enough offices and programs under the bailiwick of the Army's Futures Command to justify a four-star general being the lead.
So I was going to bring up the new Space Command. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to meet with all of the Space Command's new leadership from the commander down, and a lot of the operational leadership as well. And that's a very different defense agency than we've seen before. And their focus is, as you had mentioned, how we're going to fight wars in the future. Their focus is everything space, weather, communications, any kind of satellite ground to space systems. That's all their focus. And cybersecurity. So communications and cybersecurity, those are including, the space component of this, the satellites and weather and all of the ancillary components of communications and cyber. Space Command has responsibility for that. And these soldiers or war fighters, they're in an office. And many of them are working from home. They are not working in a traditional base or installation. So it does look very different. And I walked through I've been to a few installations in the last few weeks. They are very empty. And I think the policy is, if you can work from home, work from home. So it'll be interesting to see how these installations evolve and adapt with exactly what you had mentioned, how we're going to fight new wars, what this war fighter looks like. It may not be the traditional soldier, walking into battle, but rather a soldier, airman, sailor that's the Space Force team that is behind a laptop or a computer, right?
No, that's right. That's why I say it's dependent. It will become more dependent on providing individuals with all the necessary cutting edge capabilities rather than the more traditional marching in lockstep, visually out on some battlefield, for instance. So you're absolutely right.
One of the creative strategies that we have worked was this concept of enhanced use lease, EUL. We did a lot of the initial strategy, the policy work, and then working with installations, developers. It was this triad of the policy team, which was very difficult, as you know, that the installation leadership and the private sector coming together to implement this concept of enhanced use lease, which is that taking excess or designating pieces of federal land and parts of the installation and using it as mixed use. And so in this initial EUL that we worked, we brought in military, civilian, we brought in commercial workload, retail, restaurants. It really was a true mixed use development on this installation. But also what we have found, you had mentioned this earlier, that MILCON, to get military construction funding and a focus is so difficult, and you get in line, and if it's not a priority, you may wait 10 to 12 years to get your MILCON project funded. So one of the things that we worked with this EUL strategy was let a private developer come in and fill the requirements of the installation. And you're not going to have to wait 10, 12 years for MILCON funding. You've got a developer, a private entity that's responsible for these facilities. And we've had a lot of success with the EULs that we have worked. Do you talk about that for a minute? Do you think that this concept of enhanced use lease has merit in as part of the overall strategy for the installation of the future?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, any third-party financing mechanisms have tremendous role to play. Military, as a rule, should not be involved in commercial activities in which the military has no special expertise, and let those whose business it is to engage and let them finance with the obvious opportunity that, if they put the money up front, they're able to make the profit. This enhanced use leasing and other third-party approaches certainly has been reflected, the desirability of it in recent legislation across the board, in statements that have come out from DoD leadership. So it just need to keep the pressure on. It is no question that there's a certain amount of realization that there's a fear among some installation garrison commanders and their superiors that by doing this, they give up control. And their bottom line is there are plenty of things for the military to worry about related to the military and tactical things that they therefore should not worry about controlling other stuff that's non-military to such a great degree. The other thing is, you mentioned about MilCon. I think there is a realization that there got to be other approaches, and Congress has begun to reflect that in some of the programs that they fund, such as the ERSIP program, which they allow OSD. It's a bucket of money that keeps growing in resilience and conservation related areas, that is in addition to MilCon and can move more quickly. And the annual appropriations are running about $250 million and maybe even more now a year. Finally, is the point you alluded to, the long and winding road. And I became aware that, just take the Army. The Army used to run about $5 billion a year of the funds have been obligated, but they had not been successfully executed within the statutory requirements. For O&M, it was 5 years. For R&D, it was 6 years. And for procurement, it was 7 years. All that money goes back to the Treasury. So talk about it self-defeating. Now, they've gotten better. There's a concerted effort. They're down below $1 billion a year, which is still a huge amount of money. But one small counter to that is a wonderful piece of legislation that had been on the books for several years before anybody in the military took advantage of it. And it's section 2922 of the 2015 NDAA that basically says that if an installation can show demonstratively savings in its energy and by implication also water related use, then it will be entitled to 50% of that savings that would go back to the morale, welfare, and recreation funds for that installation. And the other 50% goes to the particular secretariat office, in the Army's case, my old office, to be used on projects that are outlined in the statutory language that basically relate to energy resilience. And I think this is an excellent mode of opportunity. It's such a win-win-win situation. It makes those at the given installation, whether it's the leadership or the individual soldiers and families, the opportunity to be energy wise, energy smart, and they know that such savings will come back around to them. It, of course, helps the Army enterprise by funding projects that will enhance the energy resilience of bases, make them, enhance their readiness. And it's using money that otherwise the Army would never touch, would never see again. It would go back to the U.S. Treasury. So the first year that the Army did this was while I was in the office, and one of the staff, Mike McGee, discovered this. He was former Air Force, and the Air Force had done it. So, of course, he said, if the Air Force can do it, why not the Army? And he's absolutely right. So that generated a total about $35 million. The following year, it's up to about 70 million, and I think it's anticipated to keep on growing. So, and I wish, frankly, there would be more laws across the board like this in the federal government, where if a particular program can show, positive results and savings, that particular program gets to keep some of the money, and the other money goes for enhanced projects such as we described.
And this is such a great opportunity for so many contractors. Not a lot of people know this. I think, and you're aware of this, but Josh Johnson on our team worked closely with the Congress and Department of Energy to draft all of the language around the energy savings performance contracts, ESPCs, or the energy performance contracting, and came up with this concept of cost savings and sharing the cost savings with a contractor and the installation itself. So you're right. We've got a lot of clients that over the years have done really well and have done amazing things in modernizing and becoming creative around energy savings that is really going to save the federal government millions of dollars. And I think that, some of these concepts need to be integrated. And that was one of the things that you did so well throughout your career, Alex, is that you understood the environmental side of this, the energy, water. You could work the policy, you could work the politics at the agency level, at the installation level with the communities, and pulling this together. It's a talent that not a lot of people have and understand, and that's why you were so perfect for this role. I still think that your background and your skill set just was so perfect for this. I want to transition in just a second, but before I do, I've got two questions for you. One is, what do you see when we're talking about installations and infrastructure within DoD? What do you think is the largest opportunity if you were looking at A&E, all the construction, environmental opportunities and remediation, resiliency, the cost savings piece of it. Is there an area that you would recommend the private sector really look at and consider as a true opportunity in working with Army, Navy, Air Force, now Space Force agencies on installation infrastructure? Where would you recommend our clients focus that maybe they're not thinking about?
Well, that's a pretty tall order question. And I think there are a lot of different areas that would resonate depending on the expertise of the particular client involved. For instance, start with environmental. The whole remedial investigation and then cleanup of the PFOS, PFOA toxins within groundwater, drinking water, that's a huge area that will go on. The Army alone, the cost will probably end up being several billions of dollars over X number of years. They don't know how broad or expensive it'll be because there are hundreds of sites and locations and installations, particularly if you include National Guard locations, where this is evidence has shown up. And so they have to go through the investigation to see how bad the problem is, and then obviously determine what to do if indeed cleanup is necessary. So that is going to be definitely ongoing. So that's one area. Obviously, the how to describe it, I'll just say the electrification, whether it's in improve the whole battery area or vehicles, both tactical and commercial, will continue to be ongoing long-term developments and essential. It could range from, they're now, for instance, battery-powered locomotives that give no greenhouse gas emissions, can store up energy, and can be used, for instance, in extreme emergency hurricane type of situations or other situations where regular transportation has been disruptive. And that leads to another point about the emphasis in looking at, on the one hand, balancing resilience with reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon emissions. Just scratching the surface in that, when you have scope 1, 2, and 3 dynamic, and it gets, as you go down the line of scopes, it gets increasingly more difficult to define, for instance, for the military to define what their scope 3 emissions would be. So that gets into the much more complicated supplier network, and the military will have to learn and engage more fully with the experiences that innovative corporations have taken in a wide area. And they have espoused the fact that they actively seek partnerships with cutting edge technical innovators, with communities who can provide, smart city services that would be very beneficial for the military. So it's really, and the other thing, cyber is going to be important, cybersecurity, making sure that you're, building controls as basic as that, are cyber proof, making sure that you have the best of technologies. I know from personal experience that, and this perhaps was truer my first time in the Pentagon rather than my second, but the first time, of course, this predates Zoom and Teams, there was a real reluctance to have meetings over the telephone.
Yep.
A real reluctance. And part of that, I guess part of it you could argue there was a security issue, but part of it, frankly, was that the speakerphone capability in the Pentagon was generally awful. And, so we have to put those obsolescence areas behind us and be technologically quick on our toes. The whole sensor area, the whole robotics, the whole virtual training, all of these are going to be expanded and put to greater use. Wise, even more effective design of what facility structures there are. The Army conducted a survey about, 5 years ago now, about excess space. And this wasn't so much shutting down installations a la BRAC, but looking at installation by installation and thinking, okay, how much space is there on a given installation that's just not being effectively used?
Right.
And they came up with about between a 25 and 30% figure. Well, that's pretty significant. And that, frankly, gets back to my point about constellations of installations. If you can effectively use space that helps in the connection with other installations, you'll just be that much more effective.
And again, this post-COVID work strategy is going to play into that as well. I'm seeing some installations that are saying maybe we have a hotel type concept where you don't have an office, but you may need to come in to the facility once a week or whatever. You'll come in and be assigned a space, and that's for that period of time. That's where you're going to work, and really optimizing these installations. I think that I've heard some of our clients, some of our large, especially A&E clients, say, that it's difficult to work with the federal government, especially DOD, and is there really opportunity there? And we continue to win new business for our clients who are focused on the things that you talked about: environmental remediation and assessment, A&E, construction, resiliency. There's so much technology that exists in a lot of these installations that I think people often have the wrong assessment or understanding of the opportunity that exists, and really this desire to implement technology, including the things you're passionate about, Alex: resiliency, redundancy, ensuring that, I think you called it the island concept, where it doesn't matter what's happening around the installation, they're going to be able to continue to function and fulfill their mission. So one last thing about your last assignment that I think is an interesting story. I was in Washington, D.C. I had a meeting in the Pentagon the first week in September 2001. And the next week, 9/11 happened and the Pentagon was attacked. And the entry point was your office. Talk about your memories of 9/11 and then this opportunity to go back to the Pentagon and in the office really where the attack happened.
Well, I was in Washington, D.C. I was not in the Pentagon on 9/11, although interestingly enough, the day before, I was at a conference at the Sheraton Hotel that overlooks the Pentagon and was right on the flight path of the plane that did crash into the Pentagon. So I was in my downtown office. The surreal effect of that, of many, was that we had television on that showed the Pentagon and the crash scene, and the reporter was saying, well, we're hearing these aftershocks of explosion from the fuel that was stored and would then be exposed and then would explode. So you could see it, and then about, I don't know, 10 seconds later, I could actually hear it from where I was. It was so many things surreal. The day was absolutely beautiful, and the city evacuated, and our building, the office building, was very close. It was right across the street from the Treasury building, which makes it, a block or so from the White House. And the Secret Service immediately came into the building and were up on the rooftop, because the speculation was that the fourth plane, which ultimately ended up in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, due to the heroics of the passengers who basically forced the hijackers down. The thinking was that that plane was headed to hit the White House or the Capitol, which frankly, the plane that hit the Pentagon, we believe, was also headed for the Capitol or the White House, and the hijackers missed their target, if you will. It came up too quickly for them to strike. So they had to turn around, and given they didn't have a whole lot of time, they picked the Pentagon as shall we say, their second choice to strike. And let me just sort of comment further on that. The Pentagon had been under reconstruction. It was the first time in its history, and at that time, the structure was 60 years old. And they did reconstruction by whatever the word is for not quadrant, because that suggests sections of 4. This is sections of 5. And fortunately, under this horrific set of circumstances, the one section that had been completed by 9/11 with reinforced concrete was the section that got hit. That's significant because if there had been no reinforced concrete, the damage, the plane traveling at 350 miles an hour with loaded fuel tanks, would have been far greater to the Pentagon than it was, although of course it was horrific, terrible. The other point is that because that renovation work was going on, the offices were not as completely staffed as they otherwise would have been. So even though there were about 140 who were on the ground in their offices who were killed, that number would have been much greater under normal set of circumstances. As far as me being in the office, basically above where the plane struck, it brought home a daily reminder that, once again, there's the Pentagon being on defense line being on the front line. Secondly, of course, the Pentagon Memorial, which is really, really well done. And I was there at its inaugural opening back in 2008. I was still at the Pentagon at that time. I came to the Pentagon in 2004. That is directly below my office window, so I'm constantly reminded of those who made sacrifice. And I did know one of the people who was on the plane who was killed. The bigger picture for me and why public service, but particularly public service related to the Department of Defense and helping our soldiers and their families who voluntarily put themselves in harm's way so that the rest of us can lead as secure possible as lives as possible. I never served in the military. My father was a World War II Navy in the Pacific. He's 21 years old. He ended up being the captain of his ship. He was able to, at Okinawa, under attack, before he was skipper of the ship got stuck on a coral reef and the captain could not get off the reef. My father, imagine, he's 21 years old, and he, as a commissioned lieutenant, he leads the crew into jumping jacks on the aft of the ship, and they basically rocked the ship off the coral reef, and they all lived to fight another day. The next day, of course, a much larger ship, a destroyer, got stuck in the same general area on a coral reef, and a kamikaze blew the whole ship up. So this, I'm constantly reminded, and it was my small way of doing some sort of service that could be helpful to those men and women and their families in uniform. And the last point to make is, because of 9/11 and enhanced security, no windows open at the Pentagon. And I do regret that, although I sure understand why that's the case.
Exactly right. That's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing that, Alex. You have had this tremendous career and continue to be a thought leader in this work, and I really admire all you've accomplished, and there's still a lot for you yet to accomplish. Over the last few weeks, we've talked a lot about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and this $1 trillion that's being pushed into the economy and what this is going to look like, how it's going to function, what the investment will go to fund. And it's all the things that you love. It's infrastructure, it's water, environmental, energy, resiliency, technology. And we, as you know, we've started working with a lot of clients in capturing this funding, which is, it's been interesting working with the Congress and working with the various agencies on the mechanics of how IIJA will function, which is the government agency responsible for the project is actually writing proposals and going through the traditional LSI capture strategy and capture planning and proposal development to get the funding for the project. Then they will RFP this workload, and the commercial entities will compete and win this business. So it's starting to trickle out now. We've done several projects already and continue to be really on the front lines of this IIJA workload, $1 trillion. going into the economy. And a piece of this will be DoD, and obviously this is your expertise. But I mean, it really the work that you have done for the last 30 plus years. This is your this is your expertise. Water, energy, transportation, modernization, technology, all of those disciplines. And I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on where this is going, but we're excited that you're on our team and helping our organization and clients navigate this.
Well, I am excited to be on the team, and you've got a great team, and I look forward helping in any way that I can. Obviously, as you alluded, it's definitely a work in progress. Just like anything with the military is a work in progress, and the challenge and the opportunity is to make sure that good ideas, smart ideas are delivered to the right people, the decision makers early on, so that it gets worked in to all of the financial processes that the military has in place and has to follow. I just know that the budget planning under the normal set of circumstances, they're 5-year cycle, potentially 10-year cycle. They're well into planning just under the regular set of authorizations and appropriations about at least 1 to 2 fiscal years ahead of where we are current. And of course, we have a continuing resolution, so we don't even have appropriated dollars yet for the current fiscal year. So it is a sort of an abreast type of scenario, but that's the nature of the beast, and you have to recognize that and work within the structure and processes that are provided. And I've, once again, proud to be part of the team and happy to help in any way I can.
Thanks, Alex. There's so much opportunity, and really appreciate your thoughts and all of the work that your service for your career. You really had a significant impact, and I admire you so much. It's been great working with you all of these years, and look forward to accomplishing some great things, especially under this IIJA and working the military installation of the future projects with you. So thank you. Thanks for doing this, and I really appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Well, thank you, and the feeling's mutual, and I really enjoyed this, and would be happy to do further podcasts as appropriate.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with the Honorable Alex Beeler. He has an incredible history. His resume is amazing. He's really been party to so much history over the last 30, 40 years. If you have an interest in any of the topics that Alex and I discussed today, if you're interested in growing workload, capturing workload, if you're interested in any of the defense installation business that we discussed, including resiliency, environmental issues, if you have an interest in A&E, civil engineering, or any of the other topics that we discussed, and especially if you have an interest as either a government entity or a private contractor that wants to capture business with this funding being pushed through IIJA, please reach out to us. We'll have a member of our team walk you through this and help you capture that funding, help you execute on command centers or building supply chains. If you're a federal or state contractor and you have an interest in capturing new business, please connect with us and we'll help you achieve your business development objectives. Thanks everyone. This was a fantastic episode and really look forward to our next guest.